You've probably been told that as a medical professional, you should pay off your student loan debt as fast as humanly possible. In this video, we're going to break and rebuild the belief that in order to be successful with money, you need to be debt-free ASAP. What? I'm Kristen Burton, a pulmonary critical care PA, and I became a millionaire at 31 after allowing the Dave Ramsey plan to cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I'm in a unique spot to tell you what works about Dave Ramsey, what doesn't, and what actually comes to fruition if you decide to pay off your loans as quickly as you can. Society very much pushes this idea that you need to be debt-free to be successful. And the Dave Ramsey plan just perpetuates that, right? The idea is that you need to pay off 100% of your debt immediately as soon as possible before doing anything else with money. And so these common beliefs that are out there, they heap shame, honestly, upon those of us with a lot of student loan debt in particular, and make us feel like somehow we're losing the money game because we have this debt. So let's look at what does it actually do for a medical professional if you follow the Dave Ramsey plan to a T. And if you're not familiar, that means pay off 100% of your debt. And then afterwards, you start investing 15% of your gross income into actively managed mutual funds using a financial advisor. That is the core of the Ramsey plan. Now, I say this with a little bit of trepidation because I followed the Dave Ramsey plan. Right? I actually like Dave Ramsey, and I think that as a person, he does a lot to try to help people succeed with money. And if all you had was a few $1,000s in a credit card debt and a car loan, following the Dave Ramsey plan may be a pretty darn good idea. But it's designed for the masses. And if you look at nationwide data, medical professionals actually have typically in the 99th percentile for total non-mortgage debt, because we have such high student loan debt compared to national averages. And so you're following a plan designed for the masses when you are not the masses, right? Statistics say you're actually an outlier on the bell curve. So you really need to think about whether or not that decision bodes well for your future. So let's say we'll be Sally. Sally will be a pharmacist making $130,000 a year with $130,000 in student loan debt. It's going to be federal with a weighted average interest rate of 6%. Now she graduates and starts working at 29. I realize this isn't everyone's story, but this is a very common story, right? The income is fairly average. The debt burden is fairly average. The age on graduation is fairly average. Everything about Sally is typical so that you can see not what happens to the atypical medical professional, but what happens to the average medical professional following this plan. So Sally is going to take home a little over $7,000 a month. She's going to allocate $2,500 per month to aggressively paying off student loan debt. So this is what she does. That's pretty impressive, right? Like that's a very large portion of her take-home pay. Almost a third of her income, actually technically more than a third of her income, is going to student loan debt. And as a result, she's debt-free in 5 years. That's really impressive. And you might sit back and go, wow, Sally crushed it. You know, there's very few human beings who can execute for 5 years that consistently, and Sally did it. And so she should reap a reward, right, for following this plan. Well, let's see what actually happens. So it's 5 years later. She's 34. She's totally student loan debt free. She's following the plan. She starts investing 15% of her income moving forward. Now, this is an internal calculator I built that we use to help figure out if people are on track. I'll break it down for you. Top is gross income. This is age. If it's partnership, it's the oldest of the spouses. This is what you contribute to investments on an annual basis. Your high yield savings doesn't count. Your kitchen remodel doesn't count, right? These are stock bond investments. This is what you would need to retire at 65, ignoring inflation. This is how many years until you are 65. This is with a 2.5% annual inflation rate from now until you turn 65. And so the number at the bottom tells you, this number right here, not the one in green or red, the one right above it tells you, what do I need to retire at 65 By defining that term, I mean replacing 80% of current income, ignoring Social Security, with a 2.5% annual inflation rate from now until then. Now, that actually might be a low inflation rate. Let's be real, we've all seen seasons where it's much higher, right? But it gives you an estimate. And you can see that following that exact plan puts Sally where she actually has less than half of what she needs to retire when she hits 65. So she puts in 5 years of work, 5 years of consistency, 5 years of discipline, 5 years of living on less than she earns, 5 years of delayed gratification. And what does she get for it? She gets a retirement where she can't maintain her lifestyle. She can't keep the same house. She can't keep the same car. She can't afford the same restaurants. She can't afford the same vacations. She's certainly not creating generational wealth for her family and taking care of her kids and grandkids financially, right? She's behind, which is awkward, right? Because Sally is actually like a pretty impressive human that she's able to do what she did. And yet, because she followed the wrong plan, she ends up in a world of hurt. So she's stuck working beyond 65, right? Which, frankly, is all of our worst nightmare because let's be real, most medical professionals burn out way before 65, let alone after. Now, here's the worst part. The rest of the Dave Ramsey plan is invest 15% of your gross annual income into actively managed mutual funds using a financial advisor. When you consider that the average actively managed mutual fund has an expense ratio or internal operating expenses of 1%, and the average financial advisor charges the industry standard assets under management fee of 1%, the after fee balance of Sally's actual investment portfolio is 1.7. Okay, so she's out almost $1 million in fees by following this plan. And so now we're in this doubly awkward situation where we needed 5.5 million and now we're going to have 1.75. And so Sally is going to end up working for a long time. And even if she does push out her working years into her 70s, reality says she's still going to have to make some substantial adjustments in lifestyle with the fact that her nest egg is a fraction of what it should be. This is what happens if you allocate all of your focus to your student loan debt in your prime investing years. The key part of Sally's mishap in following the Dave Ramsey plan was missing out on ages 29 to 34. That's the problem with it. Now, why did it work out for me? Two reasons. One, I acted like a psychopath. I worked 80 to 100 hours a week. We lived as a household on $35,000 a year, right? That's not a lot of money. And as a result, I paid mine off in 16 months. So my missed years went from 5 years for Sally to less than a year and a half. The second reason it turned out okay for me, and it doesn't for most, is because when I was done with it, we started living on a little bit more. But when I say a little bit more, I mean like $50,000 a year. And we invested over 50% of our income for years, right? And we continued to build our income, but we didn't really change our investing rate. And so for years and years and years after paying off the student loan debt, we took half or more of what we earned and allocated it into investments to play catch up. If you have absolutely no desire to do that, and no shame if that's the truth, right? Like, let's be real, most people don't want to do that. Then you're creating a disaster if you follow this plan, because your ability to catch up is tremendously affected, and you're going to end up forcing yourself to invest more, whether you like it or not, because you missed the golden window. Now that I've shown you what happens if you take the Dave Ramsey approach to your student loan debt, I'd also like to show you 3 big money mistakes that student loans can create, especially if they're federal. The first is accidentally choosing taxable loan forgiveness. What this means is that you're saying, I'm going to go ahead and pay on an income-driven repayment plan for the next 20 to 25 years. I don't have an eligible employer for any specific type of alternate forgiveness program, but at the end of the 20 to 25 years, my student loan balance will be forgiven regardless. However, that is taxable loan forgiveness, meaning that the forgiven balance is taxed as ordinary income. Every once in a while, we will run into someone that this is actually the best plan for them. And part of what we do inside the Millionaires in Medicine coaching program is actually map out how each strategy comes to fruition depending on which student loan path you choose. This is an option and it is a card we play sometimes. But what I often see is people doing this on accident. Here is, for example, one person's metrics with $189,000 in federal student loans, average interest rate about 6%. You can see this is a little bit older. They were on the SAVE plan, as you know. That's currently, there's a whole situation there. Well, we can talk more about that another time. But they were pursuing the SAVE plan for the payment plan, and they did not have a qualifying employer for PSLF. The total cost of their student loan repayment, factoring in taxable loan forgiveness, meaning non-qualifying employer, paying on that income-driven repayment plan for 20 to 25 years, is $100,000 more than if they would have just paid the standard repayment plan, and over $200,000 more, or about $200,000 more, than if they would have done public service loan forgiveness. You can see that the estimated taxes in this situation were $25,000. Now, I don't know about you, but I would be displeased with getting a surprise $25,000 tax bill. What I've seen more often is people with bigger tax bills than that they have no idea are coming. We just had a gentleman inside of our program married to a medical professional who was unknowingly doing taxable loan forgiveness, and within 5 to 6 years was going to have a surprise tax bill of over $100,000 for which they had zero preparation for because they didn't know it was coming. The next is ignoring if your employer is qualified, right? It's very important to recognize if you have the ability to pursue public service loan forgiveness or even an alternate state-based forgiveness program. If you don't pay attention to the status of your employer, it's difficult to know what your options are. Now, public service loan forgiveness may not save you a ton of money, but for a lot of people, it's a life-changing endeavor. And so ignoring that potential, again, creates a huge opportunity cost for you in managing your student loan debt. Here's an example for this person. This person had $354K in federal student loans. Average interest rate was 7%. She was a PA, actually in the dermatology space. She was pursuing a standard repayment, which would cost her in total almost $500,000 to pay back. If she were to elect to switch to a PSLF eligible employer, she would decrease her annual compensation by $10,000 to $15,000 per year and save over $300,000 in student loan payoff. So you can see the break-even point on that is quite a long time, right? The net gain to her would have been massive to make the employer shift, even though she would take a small decrease in pay because the net gain is so huge. Now, most people don't think of this when they're looking at their compensation. They're only thinking about that salary number. The third student loan mistake is choosing the wrong tax filing status. Federal student loans get very difficult when you're married, particularly if both spouses happen to have student loans or one spouse happens to have a high income as well, in addition to the other. This is an example of a couple inside the Millionaires in Medicine coaching program who were facing federal student loan debt, and one of them was pursuing public service loan forgiveness. Very common. Now you can see if they were to be on, we'll just look at the save plan columns for simplicity, married filing separately versus married filing jointly. The difference in the total cost of them repaying those student loans is almost $100,000, right? Now, of course, you get some increase in deductions if you're married filing jointly, which is why it's most commonly selected. But you have to take that to the next level and go, what is my student loan strategy? And how am I actually making the big picture needle mover things happen? By choosing married filing separately, this couple was able to save almost $100,000 in total cost of student loan repayment, which we pointed out to them. And they had a huge immediate value add, right, of working with us because we go in and say, hey, look, this one little thing, you've missed. Now, it changes a lot about the investing strategy to make that decision, but if it's going to save you enough money, it may well be worthwhile. If you're doing student loan strategy right, you actually create tremendous room for wealth building. And a lot of student loan strategy pairs very well with specific aspects of building wealth to create this really powerful multiplier for you, where your student loan strategy paired with your investing strategy creates a 1 + 1 = 4 scenario rather than 1 + 1 = 2. Now, a lot of folks still have a belief that if you're a PA, NP, or pharmacist, you have a 6-figure salary, you're never going to end up super wealthy. You'll never be the multi-millionaire. It is 100% completely false. Don't believe me? Watch my next video on how to do it.